Good morning from a very rainy and stormy Atlanta, Georgia. Judith and I have chosen music and hymns today, which come from the traditional Afro-American spiritual group of repertoire. This music speaks to the quest for freedom throughout history, whether we're talking about freedom from the COVID-19 pandemic, or during the Passover holiday, or during the emancipation of slaves in the American history background.
Good morning, and welcome to this new day and to the Sunday morning service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende. I am the Reverend Tom Raciello, the affiliate minister of the fellowship, and on behalf of all its members, I welcome you. We're so glad that you are part of our virtual community this morning. Of course, again this week, we cannot gather in person, but we are together in spirit this morning, this Sunday, to celebrate Passover and reflect upon its particular meaning in these times, just as we did last week on Easter's meaning in these times. A special message exploring Passover's meaning in our lives, especially in this time, will be given later in the service by Judith Genja, who organized this morning's worship. And our message will also come to us in music from pianist Paula Pease, who in the music selected explores the deep connections between the African-American experience of slavery and the story of Passover. Passover is a celebration that generally takes place in people's homes and centers around a meal called a Seder. The ritual involves telling the story of Moses leading the Exodus from Egypt. The Passover story is one that resonates with people in times of oppression and struggle, reminding us that indeed the future can be better than the past. This week, I took a little time to read through the Passover Haggadah, the order of service for the Passover meal, and I came to what I think is my favorite spot in that ceremony. It's the part where a child, usually the youngest child, asks questions, 4 questions. The first question is, why is this night different from all other nights? And for me, as I read that, that question transformed into another question, that being, why is this Passover different from all other Passovers? And of course, the answer this year is the coronavirus. I had several friends tell me that they conducted their seders with a laptop on the table so family members socially isolated or quarantined could participate. And of course, that's not just the way we celebrate Passover that's changed this year. It's true for all the holidays at this time, be it Easter last week or Ramadan this coming week. Everyone's holidays are celebrated differently because of the COVID-19. But I think there is a particular different feeling about Passover this year. It seems to me the story resonates in a different and maybe more intense way. Of course, part of the story is about plagues, 10 to be exact. The 10th plague was the death of the firstborn. It was a plague where people stayed in their houses and took certain protective steps so the plague would pass over them. Like now, death passed over some and afflicted others. And perhaps it might be hard not to see a rather superficial comparison to our times. But here is where I want to caution you. The real distinction here is that the COVID-19 is not some kind of divine punishment from a God aimed at a certain group of people. This is a pandemic, not a divinely imposed retribution that affects us all. You know, I remember a time when another virus called AIDS, when people used that kind of religious comparison to claim this was a divine punishment on gay men. And I remember how hurtful and wrong that was. The plagues in the story are a prelude to the real Passover. What is central in the story is the message of freedom. And on that, perhaps at this time of isolation and confinement, you may not be feeling very free. There are restrictions upon you, and right now, some very foolish people are even violating orders to stay home to protest those restrictions in the name of freedom. They are terribly misguided. Freedom is never absolute. It's always balanced with responsibility. That idea is at the core of our liberal faith tradition and also central to Judaism. The responsibility is about our duty to others, to the whole community. So what we do not use our freedom for is to harm another. So yes, there are restrictions now, but I want to emphasize how free we really are. Most of us have not known slavery, but have seen in those who have the yearning for freedom, keeping them moving forward and not giving up. That was the experience of the Jews of ancient Egypt and the African Americans in time of slavery and Jim Crow. Most of us have not known a Holocaust firsthand, or apartheid, or human trafficking, or racially motivated or anti-Semitic violence. There are still those in our time who are less than free, and we need to work for their freedom. But most of us are free. Your spirit is as free in this time of COVID-19 as it ever was. So let's not equate a little responsible inconvenience for the protection of all with the loss of freedom. And above all else, let's remember that we are free to believe and think and love as we choose. Those freedoms were hard-won from the time of Moses forward, and we must remain diligent to protect them. That's what we need to remember this Passover time. But for me, where Passover most speaks to us in this extra special way this year is it reminds us that we, like those ancient Jews, when they were in times of struggle, in times of uncertainty about their future, did not give up. Those ancient Jews declared in the midst of very tough times that their future can be and will be better than the past, that we will cross the Red Sea together, that we are in this struggle together, and we will be in liberation together. We won't get to the promised land tomorrow, but we will move forward together and not give up. So Passover is a time to examine ourselves in terms of what an ancient story and ritual has to teach. It is a time to think about those plagues as those things that hold us back and to think about freedom. That is how we responsibly use freedom and bring the blessings of freedom to others. So let's begin that journey by lighting our chalice with words from the Passover Haggadah. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, O Spirit of freedom. And now I invite you to join in the hymn that will be posted, and we'll switch over to Paula for that now.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende, a great place to be together on Sunday. I'm Dan Newspiel and I'm your president. Here you can bring your entire self, your full identity, your questioning mind, and your heart to share safely in fellowship, reflection, and great music. No matter where you're from or where you are right now, Whether you've celebrated religious traditions or not, you're welcome here. First, I have some items from our fellowship's COVID-19 task force. Our state has reported more cases, including some in SMA, so we now need to take the greatest precautions. We hope you've all been practicing good hand washing, social distancing, and masks when you are out, but the safest policy is to stay home. Please don't cheat on these guidelines. And remember, the virus won't come into your house by itself. You need to let it in. So please be especially careful about people and objects that enter your home. If you have a regular doctor, please make contact with them to find out their preferred methods of communication. The fellowship is keeping track of trusted emergency contact information of our members, especially those who live alone. If you have not yet provided it or want it updated, please contact Denise at the email in your chat box. The new home care guide is now available from the Facebook site COVID-19 SMA. We will include it in the link in our newsletter. This has excellent advice about taking care of yourself or someone in your home in case of infection. Evaluation of more serious COVID-19 symptoms can be done at local hospitals, and there are many effective treatments which can be started there. All SMA hospitals will remain open for non-virus related medical problems, and anyone who needs inpatient care for COVID-19 will be sent to regional hospitals. But most of us will not need this kind of care if we follow the guidelines and take care of ourselves at home. The task force wants our community to stay connected and share our feelings and experiences with each other. As a first step, we'll provide links to guidelines for a technique called active listening, and to a weekly calendar which may help you find words to express what you're feeling. We hope you find these tools useful. If you have any questions, please contact the task force. A few non-virus related announcements. Are you interested in joining one of our Zoom discussion groups? Or do you have any feedback on this Sunday service? If so, contact Diana Amaya at the email in the chat box. And if you're interested in becoming a member of our fellowship, see the link in the chat box or go to our website, uufsma.org. That's uufsma.org. Now, about today's speaker. Judith Genja is a member of the UU Fellowship and of the Jewish community in San Miguel. An attorney, psychotherapist, and educator, she was named International Humanist of the Year in 2002, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for work as a founder and director of the Global Children's Organization and programs for children in the war-torn Balkans and Northern Ireland. She lives with her husband, Mark, in San Miguel, writes poetry, paints, and is active in community work. Now we go to Tom and Diego.
I invite you now to join in our covenant, both in English and Spanish. I will lead the English and Diego will lead the Spanish. It will appear on the screen, I believe, in just a moment. We respect the interdependent web of life and work for a just and peaceful world. We encourage the search for truth and meaning, strive for compassion in our relationships, and seek values that will benefit our lives and the lives of others. This is our covenant.
Respetamos todos los estilos de vida dentro de su red interdependiente y trabajamos por un mundo justo y pacífico. Alentamos la búsqueda de la verdad y la comprensión total. Nos esforzamos por mantener compasión en nuestras relaciones y buscamos valor que beneficien nuestras vidas y las vidas de los demás. Este es nuestro convenio.
This now is a very sacred time in our service that we enter, a time when we share significant joys, sorrows, and concerns with our community. As we cannot do this in person, people have sent me theirs, and I will share them with you as Malcolm lights our candles. Also, you can briefly share your joy, sorrow, or concern by typing it into the chat column on your screen. First, Nicole Graboy is mourning the death of her dear friend Razmi Nissen, who passed away on Easter Sunday of the coronavirus. We light this candle in his memory and in support of Nicole in her grief. If you know Nicole, please give her your condolences and support in an email or a call. Several of you wish to share the joy that Kay Miller is doing much better. She is staying for a while at Sophia's wonderful facility, and she's now able to correspond by email or phone, and I think she would appreciate a message or a call from you. The next is a joy from Malcolm and myself. My Aunt Norma, who is also my godmother, has had the virus, and I'm pleased to say that at the age of 90, after 3 weeks in the hospital, she is recovering nicely, and although weak and a little bit confused, she is expected to be fine. We have a joy from Louisa Field, who you'll remember last week asked us for our thoughts and prayers for her niece who was to go undergo brain surgery. She's overjoyed to announce that the tumor was benign, removed, and her niece has now started rehab. Many of you have expressed concerns for those among us who are living alone. It is a joy for our community that our care team is calling and checking in with many of these folks and having a visit with them by telephone. This indeed is a tough time to live alone. If you know someone who does, here or elsewhere, please give them a supportive call or send an email and offer them some friendly and comforting conversation. We now light a candle asking for your good thoughts and prayers for a very talented young tenor, Gerardo de la Torre. You may remember him because he was a participant in the Bel Canto program here in San Miguel and got a scholarship to go to the Manhattan School of Music. He evidently contracted the virus in New York before coming home to Mexico a few weeks ago. He has been very seriously ill with the virus, but last I heard he was improving just a bit, and we ask for your prayers for his recovery. Again, this week we light a candle for all the courageous people, from healthcare workers to grocery store cashiers, who in doing their essential jobs put themselves at risk. And finally, we light a candle for those joys, sorrows, and concerns that you have typed into the chat column, and for those that remain unexpressed this morning but are still held deep in our hearts. I'd like to take us into a time of meditation, first guided by some words and then some beautiful music by Paula. These words are from Deborah Hafner. We're on a journey. We didn't plan it. We didn't have time for the bread to rise. We may find ourselves in the wilderness, hungry, thirsty, doubting that we should have ever come. But look around. We're not alone. It is our journey together, a journey to our better selves, a journey to a better world, a journey to a more promised land. And now to Paula.
Thank you, Paula. This fellowship strives to be loving to each other and to the larger community. To that end, we donate over half of our revenue to nonprofit organizations that benefit our Mexican neighbors living in poverty. We now want to help the most vulnerable members of our community weather this pandemic. I'd like to tell you about Feed the Hungry, one of our grantees, which for 35 years has fought hunger and malnutrition by providing hot, nutritious meals to the children of San Miguel. On a normal day, Feed the Hungry provides meals to 4,700 children in 36 school kitchens. Recently, they have courageously risen to the challenge presented by shuttered schools and parents left without work. Immediately after school closures and social distancing recommendations, Feed the Hungry launched an effort to prepare and distribute food packages to shut-in families. Over the first 2 weeks of the shutdown, Feed the Hungry launched an effort to prepare and distribute food packages to shut-in families. Over the first 2 weeks of the shutdown, Feed the Hungry delivered 1,800 food packages to almost 9,000 people, including children and adults. A single package weighs 30 pounds and contains enough food for a family of 5 for 2 weeks. This has been a stupendous effort, and Feed the Hungry is committed to continued food distribution while COVID-19 threatens our community. Our fellowship is honored to be a supporter of this fine organization. Now, in particular, our community needs more help than ever. During the upcoming music selection, or immediately thereafter, please go to our donate link, which is on our website, uufsma.org. Again, that's uufsma.org. And this is also in the Zoom chat box. Many of you may have saved money from staying at home. And many of you who are US taxpayers have received a stimulus check over the past week or will get one soon. My wife Kathy and I have decided to donate most of our stimulus check, partly to charities feeding the hungry and partly to our fellowship, so that more can be given to NGOs vetted by our Social Action Committee, as well as supporting Sunday services like this one. Please think about our greater community as you decide how much you are able to give. And thank you for your generosity. Now back to Paula.
it's a pleasure to turn over the microphone to our own Judith Genja, and she shares with us today her thoughts on what plagues us and what liberates us now.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. And I'm going to continue to share the story of Passover that our affiliate minister, Tom, introduced so beautifully, and tell how it can speak to all people at this time. Like all the celebrations of Passover, the story is repeated many times, so you'll find that this morning. Passover is the Jewish story of freedom and liberation from slavery, but the story transcends a single religion. It is a human story we can all identify with, of moving from dispossession to exaltation, from degradation to dignity. During the 8-day Passover celebration, we recount the story of a people moving from generations of slavery to eventually settling in a new place, a promised land with new possibilities. The Exodus story recounts that journey. Passover is like the genetic transmission of hope. We celebrate the Passover the world over by sharing the Haggadah, or the telling, which is read or told during the Seder meal. Families and friends gather, and we recount how we came out of slavery in Egypt. The name used in the ancient Mideast was Mitzrayim, which also means the narrow place. We crossed the Red Sea miraculously and entered into the fullness of the possible, with a 40-year stint wandering in the desert in the unknown. This story is our muscle memory for hope, for what is possible. But the story told at Passover is not just located in the mythic past. That ancient story is available to us now, inviting us to enter it for ourselves today. We deal with our own uncertainties, particularly around the COVID-19 pandemic. We face our losses as we try to live within our own social distancing and social isolation. The Passover story tells us that even when things are hard, and even when we are vulnerable, we will come through to the other side, as we have so many times in our collective past. A critical question for this time of the coronavirus plague and living within the precautions of home isolation is this: what plagues us now, both individually and collectively? What plagued them 3,000 years ago? Slavery. They had no identity but slave. They had no hope that life could ever change for the better. They believed there was no power in their universe but the oppressor, but they were wrong. The question is, one of the bridges between the ancient mythic story and the story that we are writing now with our lives. While Passover is celebrated every year, it is particularly relevant today. Because this is a story of acquiring freedom and being liberated, owning our human dignity, embracing a responsible self-discipline, and practicing justice in relationships and generosity toward others. This old Jewish story has struck a chord among other enslaved groups. Think of the African slaves in the United States. Slaveholders often compelled their slaves to attend their churches. Their intent was to reinforce the message that the slaves were destined to always be slaves. But the slaves also heard the story of the Jewish liberation, That story gave them a glimmer of hope in their own quest for freedom. We can feel that in the beautiful African American spirituals we are singing and listening to today. Passover is a way all people can connect to the timeless present. It is an event in our lives. It is an event in the distant past in which we participate now. We are invited to recognize the chains that bind us right now and the redemption that we can find each day in our lives. Never in my life has it been more relevant than today. We face the uncertainty, the fears, and the challenges of the coronavirus. And one question today is, how do we utilize the lessons of Passover? Passover's long tradition suggests a way forward. Jews would prepare for Passover by ridding their home of chametz. The word literally means leavened bread, as only matzah, unleavened bread, is eaten during the holiday. Metaphorically and spiritually, it means to remove all those things in our lives which diminish us or deaden us and need to be eliminated. Only after this cleansing of the detritus are we able and ready to start on the path to ending our personal enslavement and walk toward freedom. Consider now what the chametz is in your life and what needs to be cleansed. Passover is our communal opportunity to acknowledge the Mitzrayim, or what narrows and constricts our lives. The narrow places inside ourselves are those things which diminish and limit our well-being. They block our sources of strength, chain us to self-destructive habits, set us at odds with others. They bind us just as effectively as the enslavement in our ancestral story. And now we find ourselves in this uncertain present and unseeable future. All of this can deaden our understanding of what may be possible. Every year, Jews are told in the ritual retelling of this story that our primary obligation is to personally experience that transformation from slavery to freedom, from Egypt to the path toward the promised land, as if we were there, to personally experience that. So now I'm asking you to take a moment, take a couple of deep breaths, and consider, what are your narrow places, your Mitzrayim? What does it feel like to even contemplate them? How does the social distancing, the in-home seclusion, the lockdown affect your life? Have fears taken hold in your mind and heart? Passover affirms that you and I can identify with those ancient people who were freed. Like them, if you go toward liberation, it'll likely take you down unknown paths. It will test your resolve. It will push you to walk out into the unknown and toward a more hopeful future. Passover and the challenges of liberation are both personal and communal. In the Passover story, God sends 10 plagues to the Egyptians to persuade Pharaoh to let my people go. One plague after another, increasing in severity. You've already heard about the 10th plague. The 9th plague was darkness. It is said that this darkness was so deep, it was palpable, so thick, it kept you from even recognizing your neighbor. So now we have our own plague of darkness. Many of us are experiencing a kind of darkness brought on by being far away from loved ones, isolation from even those living close by, darkness of simply not knowing what's going on. For some of us, it's a darkness of the soul. I really feel that a darkness has befallen us today. We call it isolation, loneliness, separation from our families, from our friends. We call it being left in the dark, that is, having to live and act without enough information, from not knowing what is actually happening. But take a look on your screen. In fact, we are not cut off from our community. Here we are today, Zooming together as a UU community, thanks to the wonders of technology and the smart people who can help us navigate this. While we cannot hug or kiss those we miss, or even touch them and look them in the eye, we can be together. In fact, we are together right now. We can overcome the plague of darkness when we reach out to one another, stay connected by phone, email, FaceTime, Skype, keep on living in this vital community. During the Seder meal of Passover, we eat ritual foods to remind us of the bitterness of slavery, the arrival of spring, and give thanks to the earth. We eat matzah, unleavened bread, and break off a piece of the matzah. This reminds us that we are all imperfect, even broken people, and yet we can imperfectly participate in the healing and repair of the world. This is known in Judaism as tikkun olam, repairing the world. There are many questions asked in the Haggadah and answered. One set of questions are asked by the children, so that the story will be remembered and retold in every generation. During the Seder, there are 4 times when we drink a cup of wine. The first cup is for awareness. The second is for liberation from whatever Egypt has captured you. The third cup is for gratitude. And the fourth cup is for hope, the most essential attitude to have toward freedom. 4 necessary attitudes to take on our journey into freedom. But the Passover story has an inherent paradox. We are neither free nor are we redeemed. We remain enslaved until full liberation is achieved for all. Freedom and liberation must be communal as well as individual. None of us are totally free until all of us are free. We say, this year we are slaves, but next year we shall be free. That is a choice we make and remake each year, and the choice itself is a taste of freedom. Desmond Tutu wrote, quote, "We must remember that liberation is costly. It needs unity. We must hold hands and refuse to be divided. We must be ready. Some of us will not see the day of liberation physically, but even these will have contributed to the struggle. Let us be united. Let us be filled with hope. Let us be those who respect one another." Those words remind us that liberation comes in small steps, so don't despair. At the end of the Passover Seder meal, we sing a song, Dayenu. The word means it would have been enough. As we recount the ways God helped us in the Exodus, we sing a song of deep gratitude. We acknowledge the present moment and are fully present to the preciousness of each act of redemption and care. We greet each moment with love, letting go of conditions and judgments and expectations. It jolts us into the acceptance of the present moment with compassion, attention, and freedom. We too can sing Dayenu. We too can remember all the things we feel grateful for that make up our lives and say, Dayenu, it is sufficient. We tell the story each year, not only to preserve the memory, but to recall the tenacity and resilience of which we are capable. We stand in our genetic transmission of hope. Egypt is not one physical place. The Exodus is not one moment in time. It is the human story, the story of all people freeing themselves. We experience both oppression and liberation in the journey. The journey has both direction and destination. So let us say Dayenu with great acceptance and gratitude. A poem called Maggid by Marge Piercy says this beautifully. The courage to let go of the door, the handle, the courage to shed the familiar walls whose very stains and leaks are comfortable as the little moles of the upper arm, stains that recall a feast, a child's naughtiness, a loud battering storm that slapped the roof hard, pouring through. The courage to abandon the graves dug into the hill, the small bones of children and the brittle bones of the old, whose marrow hunger had stolen. The courage to desert the tree planted and only begun to bear, the riverside where promises were shaped, the street where empty pots were broken. The courage to leave the place whose language you learned as early as your own, whose customs, however dangerous or demeaning, bind you like a halter you have learned to pull inside, to move your load, the land fertile with the blood spilled on it, the road mapped and anointed for survival. The courage to walk out of the pain that is known into the pain that cannot be imagined. Mapless, walking into the wilderness, going barefoot with a canteen into the desert, stuffed into the stinking hold of a rotting ship, sailing off the map into Dragon's Mouth, Cathay, India, Siberia, Golden Medina, leaving bodies by the way like abandoned treasure. So they walked out of Egypt. So they bribed their way out of Russia under loads of straw. So they steamed out of the blooding, smoking charnel house of Europe on overlighted freighters forbidden all ports. Out of pain into death or freedom, or a different painful dignity into squalor and politics. We Jews are all born of wanderers, whose shoes under our pillows and a memory of blood that is ours raining down. We honor only those Jews who changed to not, those who chose the desert over bondage, who walked into the strange and became strangers, and gave birth to children who could look down on them, standing on their shoulders for having been slaves. We honor those who let go of everything but freedom, who ran, who revolted, who fought, who became other by saving themselves. And so, now I lost that. Can you? Ugh. At the end of the Seder meal, Oh, where did I have that? Okay. We tell the story and we close with hope using the words from the Haggadah. Lashana Abaa Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem. But today we can say next year in a world at home, in a world without fear, in a world supportive of the planet, in a world of kindness and love, in a world of caring and support. May we all be in a healthy place, in a real democracy, next year at home with family, loved one, and friends and community. Next year at home in a place free from the plague of the coronavirus, and together in our beloved UU community here in San Miguel. Now we will return to Paula Peace, who will play the music for hymn 116, I'm on Your Way. You will see the words on your screen, and we invite you to all sing along.
Indeed, we are on our way. We are on our way to the promised land, not the Jerusalem of the physical location, but the promised land within ourselves, the promised land that we reach by addressing those things that hold us back, those plagues, those entrapments that cause us to fail to be all that we can be. So next year, when we say those words, next year in Jerusalem, we mean that we will be in a better place next year. We as individuals, we as a community, we as a people who seek freedom, hold on to hope, and seek peace. Thank you so much for being with us today. And Judith, thank you so much for your wonderful message of capturing Passover in our time. We travel with the light of this community, the light of this faith tradition, which embraces so many different faith traditions. So now we extinguish our candle, but our light we carry with us.